Well, thanks for joining us here for our Agri-Pulse Washington Week in Review. I'm Spencer Chase, joined as always by Agri-Pulse Senior Editor Phil Brasher. And you may notice that we're coming to you a little bit late this week. To be quite frank, that's because the news is coming to us a little bit late this week.
Kidding.
Taping this on a Friday afternoon, and earlier this morning, House Speaker John Boehner announced to his colleagues that he would be resigning from the speakership as well as from Congress, effective at the end of October. We also have a Chinese dignitary in town, President Xi, visiting with President Obama, holding a press conference earlier this afternoon. And yesterday, Pope Francis was in town addressing Congress and speaking to just kind of the general public as a whole. So really enough hasn't gone on in the last 48 hours. So we'll do our best to summarize what this means for you, agriculturally speaking. And Phil, for starters, the story of the day is obviously House Speaker John Boehner's resignation. Now, obviously, there's a ton of implications for this as far as the general leadership of Congress is concerned. I mean, he had been in that position since 2010.
Right.
But agriculturally speaking, there's a lot of things up in the air right now. We've got a highway bill, a budget, things of that nature. What does this resignation mean for those events in the next couple of weeks?
Right. And Spencer, you're exactly correct. There is a long-term highway bill that needs to be done this fall, and also a broad budget deal for fiscal 2016. This is really critical for agriculture because many farm groups are looking to that budget bill to carry a number of policy riders, that we call them, to address various parts of President Obama's regulatory agenda, not the least of which is the Clean Water Act, the Waters of the U.S. rule. Now, suddenly, we have a vacuum at the top of the Republican leadership. Just as the House Speaker and Majority Leader in the Senate, Mitch McConnell, were set to start negotiating with President Obama over the spending levels for fiscal 2016, but also all these policy issues.
And he, as I mentioned earlier, he's going to remain as Speaker through the end of October. So, you mentioned the leadership vacuum. He's still going to be there, but I mean, what do you think that's going to do for negotiations when you can really see the light at the end of the tunnel of his leadership, and when you're negotiating such things as a continuing resolution to avoid a government shutdown, as a potentially a 5-year highway bill?
Right. Well, two things. First of all, he's a lame duck. So you do have a vacuum to a great extent, even though he's still the Speaker for another month. The other question, though, is the influence of the conservatives in the House Republican caucus, who essentially forced him to resign. And they are already demanding that that they get somebody who is more sensitive to their issues, and more importantly, more willing to stand up and fight the White House on a range of issues, starting with Planned Parenthood, but you'll see it on other issues as well. They don't think that the current leadership is standing up to the White House. And that's the message that they are getting from talk radio, from cable news, and importantly, also from several of the Republican presidential candidates.
So bringing things down kind of ground level here for a little bit, the government is only funded through next Wednesday. And right now, as we mentioned a couple times, are working on a CR. What can you tell us about the stance and the state of those negotiations?
Right. Well, that may be a little clearer than what's going to happen in the next few months. The Majority Leader of the Senate, Mitch McConnell, and Speaker Boehner, now on his way out, have set up a process starting Monday to move a stopgap spending bill that would keep the government funded probably into December without the Planned Parenthood issue. Now, a lot of conservatives are not at all happy about this. They wanted a vote in the House to defund Planned Parenthood, and can't get through the Senate. We saw that this week, but they were still insistent on being able to do that. Ultimately, they don't have a lot of leverage at this point. So there's still a good chance that next week both the House and the Senate will pass a continuing resolution, or this stopgap temporary spending bill, that will then put off these big decisions until later in the year.
and it remains to be seen whether that's going to last through October, November, December. We'll be sure to keep you up to date on that. Also want to briefly talk about the Chinese dignitary, President Xi is in town. Don't know a lot about what happened with that visit, because obviously a lot of the things that were said behind closed doors between he and President Barack Obama. But what can you tell us about some of the administration's priorities coming into this visit?
Well, the administration, Spencer, was getting a lot of pressure from farm groups, from the biotech industry, and their allies up here on Capitol Hill to put pressure on, for the White House to put pressure on President Xi this week to accelerate their import approvals of some new biotech traits. We know that the administration officials did raise this issue behind the scenes with Chinese officials. Apparently it was new to some of the Chinese officials that this was a priority. There is an expectation among the sources I talked to in the biotech industry and the ag sector that these approvals, are 7 of them right now that are pending final approval, and there's several more in earlier stages. But there's an expectation that these that China may start moving these in the next few weeks.
And shifting gears a little bit, I just want to wrap up talking a little bit about the visit of Pope Francis to the United States, a historic visit for a lot of reasons. Also, I believe the first pope in the history of the papacy to address Congress.
Exactly.
And spoke on a few topics with implications for agriculture, primarily immigration and climate change. Phil, what can you tell us about the message that Pope Francis had for Congress, and what do you think those implications will be legislatively going forward?
Right. Well, he gave an overarching message, very much rooted in Catholic social doctrine, about appealing to members of Congress to focus on the common good in the range of policies. And he specifically talked about welcoming immigrants. He talked about, he didn't actually mention the word climate or climate change, but he was clearly referring to that.
Air pollution, maybe something
right,
like that.
and he talked about, again, addressing that issue and addressing the environmental challenges in the context of doing what was best for our common home, for the common good. Will it have any short-term ramifications? I don't think, I don't think so. It certainly changed affected the tone very briefly yesterday. Right. I don't know, that may have all faded. It could be easily forgotten. I think the kinds of things he talked about are issues that are going to be more at the long term, and among constituents in the base. I'm not sure how much effect they will actually have here in Congress in the short term.
Right. So, historic visit for the Pope. I believe he's in the U.S. for a few more days in New York right now, and I believe headed to Philadelphia after that. But historic visit, historic traffic as well. So that was certainly an interesting time in D.C. the last couple of days.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's going to about do it. For all we know, Mitch McConnell and Harry Reid have buried the hatchet while we're sitting here and having this conversation. That would make sense. That would be due for what has happened on this Friday. Who knows what else is going to happen, but we'll be sure to keep you abreast of everything that is going on Capitol Hill as it relates to agriculture at agripulse.com. For Phil Brasher, I'm Spencer Chase. Have a good one.